Hello! I've been meaning to make this video for a while. Today I'm going to discuss 11 books that I wish I could read again for the first time. That is slightly distinct from wanting to reread a book, because obviously rereading is always beneficial. You may know the story already, but there might be elements of the plot or themes or symbols which you develop a greater appreciation for by reading the book again. And some of these books I have reread and they've been a wonderful experience, and it's like deepened my passion for them. But I want to read these books again for the first time for a couple of reasons, because I do want that experience of the story and the thrill of finding out what is going to happen all over again, because now obviously I know what's going to happen. So yeah, part of it is wanting to re-experience that plot, but also all of these books I feel like opened my eyes to a new way of writing and storytelling that I hadn't come across before. So I just want that joy and that pleasure of discovery. I mean, some of them are really lauded books that I had high expectations of. So I read it and I thought, yep, there's a reason why this is considered such a great book. And others, I didn't really know much of anything about them before going to read them. And so there's just that absolute joy of discovery of a book and opening up a whole new world to me that I found so pleasurable that I just want to have that experience again. And of course that can't happen, but yeah, I would love to read these again for the first time. And I was partly inspired to make this video because of Sean at Travel Through Stories on his channel. He did this same theme for a video, and I love how he talked in that about how some of the books that he read, it was this discovery of I never thought that a book could do this. And obviously this is fiction. Writers can do whatever they want in fiction. But there's that sense sometimes, isn't there, when you read a book and you think, wow, I didn't know that you could do this with language and with storytelling. And it comes across as such a revelatory experience. And I felt that about so many of these books as well. So I'll link down Sean's video because I'd really encourage you to watch that and to subscribe to his channel if you don't already. He's such a wonderful, empathetic reader, really intelligently looking at the books that he's reading. So I'm going to go through this list of 11 books. There are some classic books in here. There's some more contemporary books. There's some modern classics. It's a whole mixtures of different kinds of books that I've read in the past 20 or so years of my life. But I would love to know how you would answer this question as well. Do you have any particular books that you wish you could read again for the very first time? Let me know about that in the comments below, but also let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're interested in reading any of these books that I'm going to talk about now. So to start off, I'm going to talk about Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, and this falls very much in the camp of wanting to experience the thrill of this story again, because this remains like one of the most suspenseful and excitingly plotted books that I have ever read. There are so many twists and turns in the story as we follow a girl that's born and lives in a family of thieves in London in Victorian times, and how they scheme to swindle an heiress out of her fortune, and so she kind of plants herself in this heiress's life. But then there are unexpected consequences, and there are twists in the story that I really didn't see coming, and which left me gasping so much while reading this story and gripped me so much that I just had to keep reading and wanted to find out what was going to happen. But also, like, over time, I've developed much more of an appreciation for the richness of this storytelling. I mean, it wouldn't work so well, all this like well-plotted story, if it wasn't so atmospheric, if it wasn't so finely detailed, if this period of time wasn't recreated with such care and loving attention to give really a new view of this historic period of time, but which made it feel so familiar but also so new. And so reading it was just a revelation. Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. I think I first read this novel when I was around 19 or in my late teens, which feels like the perfect time to discover Dostoevsky, because this novel is such a soul-searching journey following Raskolnikov, who's poor and who schemes to get a large amount of money, and following the consequences of that. And the way Dostoevsky writes with such psychological insight, but also intensity, that you really feel the dilemmas and the circumstances of his characters. I just fell in love with this book and was so mesmerized by it and the whole world that Dostoevsky creates in this fiction. It's incredible. The Story of a Marriage by Andrew Sean Greer. I partly want to read this again for the first time because of the story and the plot, and there is a big twist in this novel that I didn't see coming, but which also makes a big impact because it really challenges you to think about your own preconceptions when you come to reading a story. And I won't give any spoilers if you haven't read this book, but yeah, it really challenged me to think about how I read stories and how I imagine certain situations and characters and bring my own preconceived notions to them. So it follows the story of a couple in the 1950s and the struggles in their relationship, but also the struggles with the society around them. And this book, yeah, again, was just a complete revelation to me. And I think Andrew Sean Greer is such an excellent storyteller. And I'd forgot that I went to see him give a reading here in London. So I have my little signed copy here. The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This story is so moving, following Sally as she writes a series of letters to God, discussing her life and her struggles. It is such a beautiful journey. The language in this and the portrait of society and its struggles and issues to do with sexuality and race. It is also beautifully explored through this character, which you really feel the heart and soul of her throughout this story. And I remember reading this in Boston and just being so captured by it. And this was the very first novel that I ever had signed by an author. So I saw that Alice Walker was doing a signing at the Boston Public Library and quickly bought a copy and ran in to have it signed by her. And I've told this story before, but I never forget this because my copy is slightly weathered, not just because I read it, but because I was reading it once on an airplane and the woman sat next to me, who I didn't know, spilt some water on it and said, "Oh, it's just water, it'll dry, it doesn't really matter," but it damaged the pages. And this is my first book, but that I had signed by an author. So I have never forgiven her for that. Solar Bones by Mike McCormack. This is a novel that completely bowled me over with its style of storytelling, which I've never come across before. There are obvious influences to this book, but it does something entirely new in its narration of a man in Ireland who is dead, and it explores his feelings and his memories of the past, which just flood through this narrative in such a beautiful and lyrical way, but which is also so insightful, and it's so interesting, like constructing the story of his life through this way. It's incredibly powerful, does something so new and exciting that I just fell in love with this book. The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. This is a novel that just completely swept me back to a bygone era and made me feel like I could completely experience it. The detail that she uses to evoke the atmosphere of this society is so evocative and powerful, and the psychological richness of her characters and Newland Archer's like debate about the romance he wants in his life, and should he marry the steadfast May, or should he have an affair with the exciting and mysterious Countess Olenska, and the tension of that romance and how it plays out. It says so much about the deepest dilemmas of our lives, and I really felt that in reading this story. And also, whenever I look at this, I can't help thinking this like sense of pride, because I first read this when I was a teenager, but then read it again at university, and something as we were having a discussion for it in class, something like clicked for me when I realized that May enters this archery competition and she wins, even though Newland is called Archer, and that seems to say something significant about that story, that May is the winner. And I made this observation in the class, and everyone was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that before. That's a really great symbol. And it's not like the most revelatory observation about this novel, but yeah, I can't help feeling this like twinge of pride thinking back on that. And also I was given this copy of the book as a Christmas present, which when my parents gave it to me, they noted this, so it feels like a special like old copy of mine, and you can see how weathered it is by how distressed the spine is of the novel. Wild Nights by Joyce Carol Oates. Now, Joyce Carol Oates is my favorite author. I've read so many of her books. You can see a number of them on the shelf there right behind me. But reading this book, like, it renewed my passion for her writing, because she has the ability to continuously surprise me in her writing, even though I think she does have like a distinct style of writing. Some of the stories she writes I find so like surprising, and I'm like, I didn't think that you would write something like that, but she goes there in this book, which is a collection of stories about the lives of famous classic American writers, from Edgar Allan Poe to Emily Dickinson to Ernest Hemingway, Henry James, and Mark Twain. And she tells tales about the ends of their lives, but fictionalizes them to kind of chime with the style and the substance of these authors' writing, which is so revelatory and so unique and so surprising and delightful. Where she goes to in these stories is such a revelation, in that it feels like it's honoring these authors, but also like slightly critiquing them by looking at their lives and the content of their writing, how she renews that by telling stories, fictional stories about the end of their lives. So Edgar Allan Poe's story, he ends up in this lighthouse, and it's true what the title says. It gets so wild, you won't believe where it goes. And with Emily Dickinson, it's this kind of sci-fi future set story where Emily Dickinson is this mechanized doll that this couple purchase for their own purposes in their household, and she's kind of running around it. So it has this feel of almost like a horror story, and who would think to do that with Emily Dickinson? And the same is true with the other authors. Where she goes writing about them is so both fantastical but also really interesting and insightful, thinking back on these authors and what they said. So I love this book. The Hours by Michael Cunningham. This novel is so beautiful. I fell in love with the story and the language of this book. It's a novel about three different women, one of them being Virginia Woolf, who is another one of my favorite writers, and following her in her last days, but then also two other stories, one about a housewife in post-war California, and another about a woman living in contemporary New York. And the story moves between these different women's lives in a way, showing the connection between them through storytelling, but also themes and issues that they're struggling with in their lives. And it is just so beautiful. I was completely gripped by this book. It is one of my favorite books of all time, and I love it so much. And I'm so excited because just the other day I was sent a copy of Michael Cunningham's new forthcoming novel called Day, and so I'm so excited to read this. When does it doesn't come out till next year. It comes out in January 2024, so I'm very excited to get to this. In America by Susan Sontag. This is another one of my all-time favorite novels. I felt so connected to this story when I read it, even though it's about people and a time and a situation so different from my own. It takes place in 1876 when a famous Polish Shakespearean actress named Marina moves from Europe to America with a group of people, and they go on to California to found an intentional community. So it's about this struggle for authenticity in her life. And so when I read this in my early 20s, it really chimed with me in my own struggles about how do I establish a life for myself and live in a way that is authentic and true to my beliefs and my own system of morality. And so yeah, I just felt this novel so strongly, and I was so amazed and happy I was able to see Susan Sontag talk about this book and her other work before she died. So I went to see her at the South Bank Centre here in London and had her sign the book for me and got to meet her afterwards. And it was so wonderful. I remember her enthusiasm and because I expressed my passion and love for this book, and she said, "Oh, have you read Volcano Lover yet?" Which I hadn't at that time, and I just remember her excitement of recommending other books, and I remember her recommending a whole other number of writers in that discussion, like Peter Nadas and stuff, and so instantly went out and bought a book of his. And but yeah, I just love this story so much. It's about trying to intentionally transform yourself, but also the difficulties and dangers of that, and how she explores that through her profession as an actress, but also going on to try to found this entirely new thing, and the difficulties of that is so powerfully conveyed. Another great classic, Madame Bovary by Flaubert. I've reread this book a number of times and always find new things in it. I always find it a journey which I become completely gripped by, following the story of Emma Bovary as she marries someone who's quite dull and tries to settle down into this life, but finds herself getting really restless. And so following her journey and her downfall is so gripping, and the detail that he creates her story and her rich psychology is just so beautifully done that I completely adore this novel. And finally, one of my favorite authors, although not my favorite novel by Virginia Woolf, that would be The Waves. But I picked Orlando because, as you can see from the books I've picked, I love novels about self-transformation, and this must be one of the ultimate books for that, because it's about a young nobleman who changes very much over a long period of time, including changing genders, and how the creativity of this story, it is so wondrous and so exciting. The way it interacts with history, the way this gives a different perspective on biography in general, and how we look at people, how we summarize and understand a life in all its complexity, and can that be contained within a single story? I feel like Virginia Woolf is like teasing out all of those boundaries in this book, which is so wondrous. And I have reread this book a number of times, and her writing is so detailed. There is so much more to explore and discover in this book, and that I kind of forget about when I go back to reading it, but which I'm so excited to rediscover. But I wish I could get that experience of reading this again for the first time and just being completely wowed by what she does in this book, which I didn't think was possible, even though these are novels. You know, it says it in the name. It recreates the form with every fiction that's written, but she does something truly novel in this book, which is so extraordinary and wonderful that I love it so much. So those are all the books I'm going to discuss and that I wish I could read again for the very first time. Like I said, I'd love to know if you have read any of these books, or if I've intrigued you to read any of them now. If you have not read any of these books, I envy your ability to read them for the first time and discover them for yourselves, and I would really encourage you to do so. But I would also love your recommendations of books that you wish you could read again for the very first time. So thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.